Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon and good evening. It's with great pleasure that we're now going to go into a session to talk about strategic leadership. And for me, in essence, strategic leadership is about thinking of the bigger picture, the longer term, not just the immediate concerns, the firefighting, though that also has its place, whether you're a Treasury leader, a CFO, or even a chief executive. Today, I've got four fantastic panelists who are going to talk to you, first of all, a little bit about their organisation and the context in which they find themselves in this COVID-19 pandemic. So I'd like to turn, first of all, to Adam to introduce himself and talk a little bit about that. Thank you, Adam.
Thank you, Caroline. Hello, everybody that's dialed on for this session. And I hope that everyone is safe and well during this uncertain time. So as Caroline said, my name's Adam. I'm from the UK, currently based in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE, in the Middle East. And recently have been appointed as the Group CFO of Etihad Aviation Group. My background prior to that is predominantly probably 70% Treasury, covering retail, financial services, fast-moving consumer goods. And for the last 6 years, I've done a number of roles at Etihad here in Abu Dhabi. I'm a fellow corporate treasurer. I'm a management accountant, and I also hold an executive MBA. I think from my role here, Treasury is a very key part of that, and is a key part of my DNA. And I think that you're going to hear from myself and the other panelists today the key role that treasurers and finance leaders have in the current crisis that we're all faced. What is Etihad and who is Etihad? I assume most people know this. It is the national carrier of the UAE. We're based out of the capital, which is Abu Dhabi. We are going through a significant transformation, which prior to COVID was well on track and we was over-delivering. And now, driven by finance as a key part of the pumping heart within the organisation, we are refreshing our full strategy and medium-term plans. A key part you're going to hear me talk about today is the technical part and what skill set I'm having to dust off and encourage and develop within my team, but also how, with a CFO hat on, how I'm leading, inspiring, and trying to keep motivated and engaged the 650 people that I have within the broader group finance function, which is spread across 50 different countries, that's 50, and 54 different nationalities to manage. And the last point before I hand back to Caroline is for those that do celebrate it, I wish you all a Ramadan Kareem, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam, and well-made point, Ramadan Kareem to everyone. And congratulations again, Adam, on fantastic stuff. So now if we could move on to the other side of the world, and Francis, would you like to introduce your organisation and tell us a little bit about your context at the moment? You've just gone on to mute, Francis. So whatever you just pressed was mute. What we'll do, just while Francis is sorting out his audio, if we could move on to Joanna to give her context, and then once Francis is on, we'll go back to him.
Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending on where you're joining. My name's Joanna Bonnet. I work for Page Group PLC here in the UK. You probably know my company as Michael Page. We're a recruitment company. We operate under quite a few different brands, but of all the Michael Page or the Page Personnel brand globally. We're in 36 countries officially. And through this COVID-19 crisis, we have very similar challenges to all of you. From a Treasury point of view, we are wondering where the cash is, where the next revenue is coming, and where the cost savings are going to be. So from that point of view, as an organisation, we're very, very similar. I think more broadly as an organisation, we're here delivering on occasion some bad news or helping individual people within each society cope with this crisis. So if we think about an individual, a job seeker, or someone wanting reassurance that their work is okay, that their profession is okay, or perhaps they want to look for a change. My organization and that of other recruitment firms, we're here talking about what does a furlough scheme mean? What do redundancies look like? Perhaps we're delivering bad news that the job that they wanted or that you had just accepted is no longer happening, or maybe it's been deferred for 6 months. In addition to that, companies such as mine and other recruiters, we're helping governments globally transition workforces. So, by example, those that may have been in the aviation industry may now be helping within shops, such as a supermarket, stacking shelves or being on the tills. From that, you can imagine we have a huge global workforce trying to juggle not only our own individual expectations, but also helping build confidence in everyone in their career going forward. So, and Treasury is not alone. We're helping with our part through this process.
Thanks very much, Joanna. Francis, are you able to unmute now? Are we back on?
I'm sorry to put on mute because the sound didn't come through a minute ago, so I have to check again. Now it's okay.
You sound brilliant now. Great. So Francis, would you like to introduce your organization and just a little bit about the context in which you find yourself today?
Yes, I'm very happy to, and everyone is nice to catch up with all of you over the web in this very extraordinary period of time. I wish you all well and safe and healthy. And if I can just spend a couple of minutes to introduce CLP. CLP stands for, in a long form, China Light and Power. You can perhaps associate China Light and Power with a company supplying in the power electricity industry in China. That's exactly what we did over 120 years ago. The major shareholders at that time set up a power company in Guangdong, the southern part of China. And after the new China was set up, the company moved to Hong Kong. So it was founded in Hong Kong in 1901. This is the 119 years of history of the company. And we are based in Hong Kong, but we do have diversified business portfolio in the region. Apart from Hong Kong, we have operations, we have investments in Australia, India, China, Southeast Asia, including Taiwan, Thailand, and a couple of other nations. Hong Kong is always our homeland and offer us the majority of the revenue and earnings. We supply to 80% of the people in Hong Kong. We operate under a so-called regulated regime in Hong Kong. So we are an integrated power supplier, linking up generation, transmission, distribution, and retail. And for overseas, depending on the regulation of the countries, we can participate in generations, we can participate in transmission and distribution, or retails. So for example, in Australia, we trade in the name of Energy Australia, and we participate in generation and retail. For Hong Kong and outside Hong Kong, we are very concerned about climate and the carbon impact, because we recognize that this is a industry that no matter how hard we work, we will cause climate impact, carbon levels, and other emissions. So starting from year 2004, we have rolled out the first climate vision. And by late last year, we have come up with a climate vision 2050. It points to overall by year 2050, we'll reduce 85% of carbon levels and emission as compared with year 2007 level. Over the period, we have also diversified our generation assets into renewables, for example, solar, small to medium-sized hydro, and wind projects. We have moved very quickly from coal, even though coal assets, the legacy assets, we all installed the carbonized FGD facilities, but we have a new schedule to move faster away from coal with pretty designated timeline so that we can have a cleaner portfolio, a cleaner energy generation portfolio going forward. The group has a market cap, if I can share a little bit more, as of last year end, about in US dollar, 26 billion, and equivalent, US dollar equivalent, and we had the revenue of about 11 billion US dollar equivalent last year. I'm the group treasurer of the CLP group. This is interesting. It is also a very challenging position. I take care of some conventional functions like funding, liquidity, financial risk management. I also manage the credit rating aspect and the group treasury system, which we have moved to a new system, a highly automated system about 2 years ago, hopefully to put down a more transparent auto AI supported process so that we can optimize the and reduce the operational risk going forward. This is also a position that I sometimes participate in decision support, which make the post a little bit more exciting and interesting. So that's probably about CLP. We do have a large customer base in Hong Kong and Australia of over 2.7 million accounts in each of the 2 cities. So that make us not only will have the chance to work on some high-level strategic perspective of treasury activities like funding, DCM, and so on, but we also need to have a supporting team to work out daily treasury operations, which I will call the bread and butter. They are very important. Without good operating teamwork, we'll not be able to spread out our effort in other more strategic, ad hoc, but exciting transactions. So that's all from me. Thank you, Carol. Nine.
Thanks very much, Francis, and very, very interesting. Now, last but definitely not least, we're going to move to Wilson. If you'd like to similarly give an introduction to your organisation and your context. Thanks, Wilson.
Perfect. Thanks, Caroline. Thanks for the opportunity. Hi, everyone. Very, very glad to be in the midst of finance and treasury professionals. Just want to start with saying that, you know, I'm a chartered accountant by training, so I'm at the ACCA, and currently I lead the treasury function at Grab. Previously, I worked at BP for more than a decade, the oil and gas company. So for those who may not have heard of Grab, Grab is Southeast Asia's leading super app that provides everyday services that matter the most to its customers. So as of today, we have more than 160 million downloads of the app itself. And we leverage on open platform strategy and technology to provide safe, accessible, and affordable transport, food, package, grocery delivery, mobile payments, and financial services to millions of people in Southeast Asia. We bought over Uber's Southeast Asia ride-hailing business back in 2018. And we have technology centers across the world in Seattle, US, Beijing, China, Romania, Bangalore, and India. At this juncture, we are still a pretty young private company, and we have raised close to $10 billion in venture capital funding from investors, who include SoftBank, Uber, Microsoft, Toyota, MasterCard, just to name a few. So bringing it back to treasury context, in terms of financial metrics, we started, as with most companies, we started the year very strongly, firing on all cylinders, and the numbers look very promising. Then came COVID-19 and the impact on travel, mobility, lockdowns, and work from home arrangements. So just imagine how the world has changed in such a short period of time. Was really unprecedented. So from a business perspective, transport volumes have come down quite a bit. And that's partly offset by the high demand in food, packaging, deliveries of groceries, and contactless payments. And as with most companies, whilst capital allocation and cost structure decisions are being revisited, reevaluated, Treasury remains very much at the heart of the organization, ensuring that cash moves to the right place at the right time, and appropriate mitigating actions put in place for incremental risks, financial risks that may arise from this pandemic. So for example, emerging currency risk, the drop in investment yields, etc. So I'll just take a pause there and pass the mic back to Caroline.
Thanks very much, Wilson. That was great introductions from everyone. We're going to get our audience involved a little bit now. I think one of you has already jumped ahead. We're going to put up a poll, and the poll asks the question, what was your greatest challenge at the beginning of the COVID-19 lockdowns around the world? So really at the beginning of the pandemic. And if you'd like to start filling out that poll now, that would be great. And so while our audience, hopefully that's coming up now for our audience to do the poll. And just for those of you who are entering the poll and haven't yet finished or have finished and are waiting, I might explain my virtual background here, because you might be wondering what I'm doing in a cathedral. Well, every few years when we're in Liverpool for our annual conference, we have a big gala dinner, and we hold it in the cathedral. And this is actually a picture, it's cropped from the audience, but below that big window, there are all the people dining and enjoying themselves at the annual conference gala dinner. So that's why I put that virtual background up today. And that's one of the advantages we can have from living in a virtual world at the moment. Now I see the responses coming in, and there's still a little bit of shifting around, but it looks like it's the cash flow forecasting out 3 to 6 months that is really the standout. But there's still some movement, and immediate liquidity concerns and people's well-being are kind of on a par with each other, and close behind that managing cash flow. So almost 40% is the cash flow, and then it's 25% or so on the other two. And logistics wasn't really a big problem for you. Only 8% found that as the major problem, getting yourself to be able to work from home, and managing yourself, state of mind, etc. Well, it seems like you're all in a pretty good state of mind, which is really great to hear. So thanks for engaging in that, our audience. And we're going to move on now and talk to the panel a little bit about what they find themselves to be the greatest challenges as a leader in finance and treasury during this pandemic. So maybe I could continue with you, Wilson. You know, what are the biggest challenges for you, are you finding?
Perfect. Thanks, Caroline. So it is quite similar to the poll that you have just made real life. So let me just break the challenges that leaders, myself, and I think most of you all would face into 3 aspects. So the first challenge is about people and teams. So I'm a very strong advocate of putting people first, because they are really the organization's most important asset. So very thoughtful details like ensuring there is a sustainable work from home arrangement, equipped with the right tools, secure, safe Wi-Fi, to connect with peers, clients, and banks. You know, those are utmost priority. And also to show a bit of empathy that, you know, some homes are just not meant so much as a workplace. So there are people who have parents, spouses, children around that can easily elevate anxiety and stress levels. So very much about understanding the challenges that people go through, and yet creating the avenue to discuss, to share, and to also manage those levels. We have care teams in my company, Grab, to take care of staff health and well-being. For example, we have stress management sessions, how to calm your mind. So meditation sessions through Zoom which is very interesting. I quite like it. How to cope with change and infuse, drum up positivity in the midst of challenges. And it's all done using Zoom calls, which I find very, very useful. So there is indeed heightened use of collaboration tools to communicate more often. The second challenge is within the company and organization itself, and that speaks very much to the cash flow issues, the forecasting issues. Let me start with some hard data. In a recent April 2020 global survey done by ACCA on COVID-19, 80% of business leaders expect a significant downturn in expected revenues and profit year on year. Over 1/3 of organizations already face cash flow issues. 1/5 of organizations are deferring investments. About half of businesses have not undertaken a reforecast. Over 1/5 of organizations are already freezing recruitment. So the mantra liquidity, liquidity, liquidity may sound like a broken record, but it's really super important. Company fails because they run out of cash to meet their payment obligations. And so internally, it's key from a leader's perspective to think strategically about what organizational changes need to be made to accommodate a new world post-COVID. Scrutinizing the downside risk on the assumptions over revenues, costs, performing sensitivity analysis, and externally as well, we are also working with vendors, with our banks to explore ways where we can get some form of cash flow relief where possible. Now, on the work from home arrangements, which I spoke about earlier, I noticed that quite a lot of companies are already rethinking about what the future workplace would look and feel like. How do we optimize office rental and space? Do we need to go back to 100% office? And I guess there is certain percentage of workforce that will continue to be on a work from home as a permanent feature. That's a trend I see going forward. So imagine how that would help save rentals and the impact it has on landlords. So the third challenge is more facing how do we manage externally the customers, the stakeholders that we deal with. So this is the best time. In fact, we should double down on communication, just to understand about the business situation of customers. For those who sell directly, of course, the risk of collection is there. They may be going through difficulties themselves. For Grab, most of our collections are online from our users, drivers, merchants, but we do have corporate customers as well on the corporate business, which we need to look out for as well. So it's reassessing, reimagining changes to patterns of consumption, supply, interaction, and preferences that we need to take note of. Now, of course, amidst those challenges, we should also not lose sight of the opportunity to do good. For example, for my company, we rallied some driver partners. There were thousands who volunteered to ferry patients and healthcare workers to and from their workplace, from hospitals to their home, where others would tend to avoid. Another example is where restaurants or food operators are closed down because the government does not allow dining for social distancing purposes. We actually put in a lot of effort to accelerate the onboarding of those merchants and restaurants onto our digital platform so that sales and income streams can continue. They can continue to pay their liabilities, to pay their workers, and that's the little thing that we can at least help to doing. So there you have it, 3 challenges, people, teams within the organization itself, and how do we deal externally. Back to you.
That's fascinating. It was that kind of balance between all those different elements. Adam, if we turn to you now, how would you describe the challenges facing you and as a leader?
Sure. There's many consistent messages and themes, but probably I'll just draw on 3. Firstly, is probably around the people part, the engagement, both internally with the team, with the executive management team of Etihad, but also equally as important is obviously the external interactions that we have. So a big challenge and big time commitment is given on both parts of that. So first of all, from a team perspective, as I touched upon, approximately 650 people scattered across the globe, 99% of those working from home now. So it's around the engagement, ensuring that there's consistent, clear, transparent communication channels. Obviously, very, very heavily linked and reliant on technology and managing time zones, which is extremely complex. This session we're having now is no different to that. I think ensuring that people's well-beings are maintained is key. It's a hot topic always, not just now, and is more visible in leaders' minds. Despite KPIs, it should be a key focus for everybody. And I think the current situation is no different to that. I think in terms, if I move to the individuals, some people, again, for our business, we're probably flying around 20% capacity at the moment. If we have, we have around 110 aircraft, which at the moment, obviously, due to the current situation, we've got about 20% of our cargo and some of our passenger aircrafts, which we're calling mini freighters now, flying. And again, this information is in the public domain. So some people may have some spare time, and spare time is great if it's best used, and spare time can be a burden on some people if it's not best used. So we are doing everything from a finance leadership team to ensure that, one, we communicate, but two, we encourage people to use their spare time wisely. If that's to pick up a professional qualification, if that's to learn a new language. And we've got many examples of both of those, as well as many others in terms of cross-training across the broader finance function. Keeping with people, again, interaction with shareholders, investors, banks, credit rating agencies in particular during the current situation is obviously clear, ensuring that not only the short-term projections, but the bounce back for the different sectors that we all work in, because I'm pretty confident that most, if not all, of the sectors around the globe will look very, very different. And transport, tourism and aviation is probably at the foremost of all of those sectors. I think second point is driving cost leadership across the organisation. Now, for regardless of size and global nature of any top line, our industry and many of the industries around the world have obviously taken a bit of a hammering at the moment in terms of certainty, in terms of value, in terms of demand linked to product services that are offered. So with that in mind, obviously, you turn your attention to what you can control, which is obviously your variable cost base and any other cost leadership that you can implement. So we have, within my team, we have a finance business partnering function, which, if you like, are mini CFOs in the 30 plus different business entities that we have across the group. So they have a number one KPI from a financial perspective at the moment, which is cost leadership, and linked to that heavily is how we can retain cash within the business and improve our working capital cycles. The centralized group treasury and tax function here obviously play a key role in that. And we are educating non-financial managers around the business, around the globe, in how they and their teams can obviously play a key factor in driving that forward, not just for the remainder of 2020, but for the bounce back, as I alluded to, which for sure will take us 21 and probably part of 22 to get back to where we saw 2019 numbers at. And I suppose the final point, Caroline, again, very common what you've heard from the core treasury professionals, both on the voting panel and also the virtual panel we have here, is obviously around cash and liquidity management. We have obviously 76 different destinations, which up until the second or third week in March, we was having a great first quarter of the year. We've got cash and liquidity and financial risk management to manage and related to that. But obviously since that until where we are today, our short, medium and long-term cash flow forecasting, again, working with our supplier base and ensuring there's enough liquidity in our system, despite the challenges we have from a top line perspective, to ensure that we can meet our contractual obligations, and notwithstanding our 21,000 employees, family members that we have within the group when it comes to the monthly payroll run. Different to many parts of the world and many businesses, we do not have the luxury per se of a furlong program. With having to have many tough conversations around that. But again, finance and the central group treasury function play a pivotal role in ensuring that there's enough liquidity and sources of liquidity to service all of our obligations throughout this period and beyond.
Thanks, Adam. And we'll be coming back to that more about the importance of the Treasury role. But thank you very much. Very, very challenging world that we, and particularly you in your industry, lives in. Now, if we could move maybe to Joanna to talk a little bit about the challenges from her perspective, please.
So very similar to both of my predecessors, talking about cash flow, that has been paramount at Page. We're constantly looking at what's happening today, what's happening in 6 months' time, what's happening in a year's time, multiple models going on. We're talking internally as well as externally to our stakeholders. However, for me, the most important thing is the well-being of my team. And now I am as busy as all of you. And for all of us, it's very, very easy to get wrapped up into the countless legal documents regarding the new finance or the refinancing that you're doing. It's important for us all to take a step back, to remember our team, remember who they are as an individual and what is important to them. If I look at my team, despite the fact we're really quite small, there are only 5 of us within the Page Treasury function. Each of us have a very different background, and we all have a very different item that is not only important to us, but is making our situation unique. So some of us may have partners that have been furloughed. We have others that have partners that are working all hours of day and night. We've got others with children at home, others with partners at home also working. And how do you all juggle the remote internet and the availability of Zoom calls, as well as the children's homeschooling? For each of us, we need to make sure that life is normal despite being new. And so with that, we've instilled within the wider finance function at Page things like Friday night drinks. Last week we had a pub quiz on Friday, and it was about knowing your colleagues. And in this pub quiz, we actually had people from some of our shared service centres involved. So despite the fact we were all at home, if we took our normal office environment, this was split across London, across just outside Greater London, as well as Barcelona. There were about 30 people on the call, and it was very interesting to see the dynamics and the mixing, but it allowed us to feel connected despite being perhaps isolated at home. We've also got people that live by themselves, and so we need to remind ourselves that sometimes I personally may be enjoying no commute to work. Others may actually really thrive and need the social interaction that work provides. So for all of us as leaders, we need to remember where everyone's coming from. And on occasion, that perhaps the answer that you would normally expect is not the one that you receive that day. And so it's about knowing who your stakeholders are, whether they're internally, externally, or much closer to home. That being your individual team within Treasury, or perhaps the family and the impact that you're having on your family about working through the night with all of these legal documents surrounding finance or whatever it may be.
Thank you very much, Joanna. And yeah, people as the focus. And that in part answers some of the questions that we've got coming in on how to manage teams, but we'll come back to those questions in due course, because now we're going to move back to Francis to talk about the challenges that he and his organisation are facing. So if you can unmute Francis, we'll go over to you.
Yeah, I believe I'm as busy as all of you. There are multiple tasks that we all wish to go ahead at the same time. But from the CLP's perspective, since we serve a large number of customers in Hong Kong, we have a team that leads to take care of the treasury operations on a daily basis. Even though the COVID-19 kicks in, some of the situations would require us to reduce the office work to a minimum. We adopted split team, so we quickly follow our contingent plan to split up the teammates into broadly 2 to 3, so that some will come back to office to maintain access to the Treasury system, which we need to monitor, to input and to get the information so that we can roll over the funding, for example, and to know our overall position in risks, including FX, including interest rate, and the fund flow, so that we can carry on the treasury management as usual. On the other hand, we are also updating the treasury management system. So it's a time that we have to set up helpful dialogue with the supplier and the consultant, so that we can make sure that the timeline will not be missed, and we will be able to know what we'll have as we have planned for. That's very important, because we are looking for greater scalability and the functionality of the system, so that we can link up with other in-house systems to meet our objectives. On the other side, the corporate finance team will have equally challenging, I believe, role to look at liquidity. Liquidity, as some of the other treasurers have mentioned, that is one of the most important factors during a time like this. It's important to take a look that when we talk about liquidity, it's more than a snapshot. The funding requirement in a snapshot of a particular day is in fact forward-looking, so that in terms of the liquidity, we will need to know the revised funding requirements of the group, including separate entities, so that whether we have, for example, lower or slower sale revenue. So we may have to come up with additional working capital to bridge up the funding gap. On the other hand, we'll need to know how the banks, in terms of a very limited portion of our bank facilities, are uncommitted bank lines. So whether we'll be able to continue to draw, and if we do have the rights to draw, whether we'll draw down the uncommitted line first. So that's a different aspect of planning the liquidity management. How many internal resources, including cash flows from subsidiaries, whether in the form of dividends, whether in the form of repayment of shareholders' advance, for example, will be made per projection, and if not, how and what the impact will be. I don't want to send out misleading information that any of the CLP business units have been facing adverse liquidity issue, but we believe that it is important to go through the process to critically review the situation and to come up with the latest projection in order to make the team and the management be confident and comfortable that we can meet the challenges. So these are some of the examples that what makes us busy in the past couple of months. Even though some of the team have been staying at home, some of them have been staying in a third place other than home and office. For those who need to return to office, I would try to say that for some logistic arrangements will help them to have the right level of comfort to perform in the right way. For example, at the kickoff time of the COVID-19 health issues, Hong Kong faced the same situation as in all other major cities. We don't have, for example, enough face masks. So it would be helpful for someone in the department to take care of that, to make sure that they can have usable protective masks so that they can use when they return to office, when they return home safely. And there can be other little things. For example, if the company or the department can offer subsidy to them in terms of transport costs, so that they need not, for example, they need not be jammed in a public vehicle, so that might increase their danger of exposure to the COVID-19 disease. Whether the company can provide any subsidy for them to take a cab, for example, that can ensure they can have a faster, safer, and more direct route between home and office. I think there are a lot of things that I'm sure that group churches like you, like the audience and the team that we are working along with have been done, so that we can make the past 3 months or 4 months a very meaningful event, and all the efforts have contributed to our ability to face the situation, to face the challenges in a very effective way, and come up with a end result with a high level of efficiency.
Well said. Thank you very much, Francis, and thanks to all the panelists for that. We're going to move on now to a quick other poll and see if there's been any change. So we asked a question about what you felt like at the beginning of the pandemic as things were setting out for you in your particular context. Now we're asking, what's your greatest challenge now? So at this point in time, we'd just be interested to see amongst our audience whether we have any difference. So if you would like to do that now, that poll, which you can find at the top of your screen. And we'll see the responses coming in shortly. Just as we were talking there, though, Wilson mentioned liquidity, and it's kind of a bit overused maybe. And yesterday, Matthew Hearn, we heard say, or I've heard him before say, correction, unprecedented, tired of that word, and it was mentioned again today by Paul Wild, our immediate past president of the ACT. And I personally think, well, this is an unprecedented crisis, and it is all about liquidity. So I think, those are all very valid terms to use, personally speaking. So looking just through our responses, very much it's the forecasting still out 3 months. That's even higher now, 60-some%. So where liquidity has gone down slightly, which it's kind of intuitive, I guess, because as people are getting themselves managed better and better. Well-being, that's going down. That's interesting, because I often wonder with that and with the managing myself, whether the longer you are locked down, for some people it is really, really difficult, but it seems that we're getting sorted, and the logistics has really gone down very much. So very interesting. Thank you for that, everyone. So just wanted to have a little look. We're going to move on to the next question, but I've seen questions coming in from the audience, and some of them relate very much to one of the pre-prepared questions. We've got things like, will the current crisis lead to a lasting increase in the importance of the Treasury role in organisations, as well as a wider role in business strategy? And has the current crisis brought the Treasurer closer to the CFO and board? And yesterday we heard from Matthew Hearn again, actually, and he said if treasurers are not now using this opportunity to get close to their CFO and chief executive, they're really missing a trick. So I think that's an important one as well. So if we take those questions and roll them up with that kind of thought about, finance and treasury leadership being put to the test through this crisis, and our professional as well as our softer skill capabilities, are they being put under the microscope? Are we getting this opportunity to take a wider role in business strategy? And where do you think we are in all that? And if I could turn to Joanna first, this time to let us know what she thinks on that kind of group of questions, if we like.
So thank you, Caroline. I've got two different answers, and I think they're both linked. So the first one is, no matter what we're doing today, we must remember how we got where we are. So this comes back from your education and your prior work experiences. For those of us that were working through the global financial crisis, we need to draw on that resilience and the lessons learned. to allow us to go forward and be able to get through this quicker and easier, whether that's personally or professionally. Equally, the importance of things like the ACT qualifications become paramount. I've recently been doing the advanced diploma through the ACT, and there's a raft of soft skills, negotiation, a bit of resilience, understanding your stakeholders and understanding the wider audience. These things are paramount, and they've become ever so more at the forefront when you've just learned it, and then you're working through and enacting the skills that you've learned. I think more broadly from that, it comes back to understanding your audience and your stakeholders, again, whether it's internal or external. If I think about the interaction I've had recently with my CFO, my CEO, and with my board, it's been different to each one of those members. And the way I handle that and the way I prepare for it is understanding what is important to that person at that point in time. So I need to know what else is happening in my CFO and CEO's mind, what else is happening in my board's mind. And that's really hard if you don't speak to them on a day-to-day, you don't know what's happening in their personal world. But if you're a treasurer or an assistant group treasurer, or even a treasury manager, and you're preparing that board paper that's going up about liquidity, take stock and have a think about what is happening in those other non-executive careers. Your non-executives may be an executive of a company that is having extreme trouble at this point in time. So if you're putting up a funding paper, they're going to be extremely interested, not only in the paper because they're a board member, but they will be reliving the pain that they're living in their day-to-day world when your paper goes up to the board. So it might mean that you need to prepare your CFO and your CEO well if you're not going to the meeting yourself, or you need to prepare your group treasurer for that meeting that little bit more. Remind them that this non-executive director is having trouble for these reasons in their day-to-day world. This is how we're not the same as that. Role play the situation and explain why we are different and why they are not the problems for the company that you're working for. Equally, if you end up with your team members and they're having trouble with themselves, perhaps they've not lived through the global financial crisis, they're not able to think what will come a problem in 1 week's time, a problem in 2 weeks' time, or a problem in 6 months' time. Just take the time and explain that this is how it happened in the global financial crisis. I know we don't normally ask for a daily cash position every day, but the CFO, this will become very important to them. And so you can help guide people to what you're expecting to come through. It may be a good case, it may be a bad case or a more challenging case. But for each stage, just be open, be transparent, but also think about what your audience needs.
Thanks very much, Joanna. And one of the questions that came in from someone refers to a tool that I speak to people about when I'm doing strategic leadership training, the Ladder of Inference. And in fact, you touched on that because it's trying to understand how other people see the world and not only coming from your own perspective. That's the whole point of that model. But the question also asks about how do you find time? And I think as we move through the rest of the panelists as well, it's, I think personally speaking, it is about prioritizing and making time. But that is very difficult when you're so busy. So maybe as we move through the other panelists, we can weave that thought in. And if we move next to Wilson, to give you your thoughts, please, Wilson.
Right, sure, Caroline. So I just like to start with a joke that I got through my WhatsApp group a couple of months ago. So the question goes like this: what is the single most important C factor that accelerated the digital transformation and organizational redesign? So the first is CEO, second CFO, third is CTO or Chief Technology Officer, or fourth COVID-19. So of course the joke is that it's COVID. So the way I look at it is COVID-19 has accelerated the future. So as we right size for the new uncertain future, those baggage or overheads that we used to accept and carry them along during the growth periods now have to be scrutinized and shed fast to operate on a lean basis. As we can hear from most panelists, it's time to conserve cash, watch out liquidity, and there is also a strong leadership push to accelerate automation and simplification of key business activities, streamlining processes, so that leaders within the finance and treasury remit can really focus on activities that are core and that maximize shareholder value. So very briefly, the core elements of what leaders should be focusing on. Firstly, we mentioned this one as well. Trusted business partner. Stay close to top management, board levels, CFOs to understand financial risk and cash implications of revised business plans. Secondly, while we rejig the organization, ensure that the controls and governance processes are tightened, because crisis is also a time that organizations may leave risks exposed, and cybercrime can expose or explore those vulnerabilities. So risk of fraud, errors, just need to watch out for those during these unprecedented times. And treasury professionals, we are usually trusted stewards of capital and company resources, and this extends not just to our teams, but it also extends to the banks that we work with, because they are the ones who keep our cash. So they are also going through BCP arrangements, shorter cutoff times, for example, leaner staff force, longer response times. So just have to maintain that open communication and dialogue with bankers at this point in time. And lastly, be a strong advocate of change. There will definitely be changes. So rather than hiding under a shell, I think it's time for treasury finance professionals to really capitalize on this opportunity to rise up, digitize the company, digitize the functions where possible, in preparation and thinking ahead of a new normal that's just right around the corner.
And Wilson, one of the questions that came through, just wondering if you yourself have never been through any crisis like this before, and I guess that might apply to many of us, or if you have a team that are very new to these things, would you have any message to them on the back of what you just said?
I think keep an open mind. So personally, I've been through Asian crisis, the global financial crisis, and at BP, we have a Gulf of Mexico crisis as well, which is again a liquidity crunch, 60 billion of losses. So keep an open mind. There are things that we cannot control, and there are things that we can control. So things that we can control, do your best, do your utmost best to it, and think broader than just finance and treasury. Think like the CEO. What would the CEO be worried about? What would the board be worried about? And focus on areas that can really create impact on the organization. So I usually encourage people to think beyond what they are doing. The task that we look at may be a very detailed activity level, but always not lose sight of the bigger picture. What are we serving? What cause are we serving or working towards? So not losing that big picture. Secondly is to be really resilient. Now these are times where emotions can come in, especially work from home arrangements. So it's never been tried before, but we just have to go through it at the end of the day. And it's important to talk to people if it helps, so that you won't feel that you're alone. And that's why networks like this, webinars like this are really super important to remind us of what are the things to focus on, what help and what tools are available out there, available for us to help us through. And read more as well. So I use some of my time now to attend webinars, to read a lot of research papers. I find it a good use of my time, and thinking then to bring back those contexts or those knowledge to how I can serve better as a good treasurer.
Because they say learning is part of those things that can build up our resilience. So reading something new, informing yourself can really help. And do remember, and I think that resilience point, Wilson, is really important. There are a couple of pre-recorded sessions as part of this week that you can go to that talk about mental well-being and resilience specifically, as well as a wealth of information on our Career Hub. And so, again, I would recommend to those of you who want advice around how do you cope, just go onto our Career Hub. There's masses of stuff there, or listen to those pre-recorded sessions in this week. But I'll quickly move on to Adam now, because we'd like to hear your thoughts on this massive subject.
Sure, and no, it's a really great and relevant question. So rather than repeating many of the great things that Wilson and Joanna have said, maybe I'll just build on that and add maybe two. Now, I think as treasurers, finance professionals, we've all been burdened with KYC requirements in the past. And I think some key messages that you've heard is around know your stakeholder. So again, I will change the C to an S. And that is very, very demanding, yet very, very relevant, even more so in the current situation. Now, if I build upon that, with a broader CFO hat on, you could argue that finance could be divided into four key areas. You've got the controllers and reporting pretty looking backwards as such as what's happened. We've got the business partners that I've touched on. We've got financial plan analysis, and then we've got treasurers. And the reason why I left FP&A and treasurers and Treasury to the end is because they're very similar in terms of forward looking. So again, I would focus very much on not what's happened in the past, because the past is the past, but know your stakeholders and link that to the future outlook. And someone that could be deemed as positive or romantic in the current climate would see the glass being half full rather than half empty. And I think out of every crisis, and I'm sure many of us have been through many, maybe not like this, there is opportunities out there for finance and for business stakeholders to be aware of. So I think treasurers, CFOs, and finance professionals as a whole have a role to play in that forward-looking approach rather than what's happened already this year. What can we do differently for the rest of this year and beyond? Now, again, that may be broader business that doesn't fall in your direct domain. That could be how we restructure our team, so a new target operating model to be more cost effective, more efficient, more use of technology, and so forth. And all the good points that Joanna and Wilson have said. But again, I think for me, the key messages would be look for the opportunities, because there are some out there. And secondly, know your stakeholders and look at the future rather than just reflecting on what's already happened.
Absolutely, really important. I think that last point, not worrying what's happened, thinking to the future, and we talk about sort of being in the present and not thinking about the past. It can be very damaging if we get too involved in thinking of what's happened, things that we can't control. So it's really look at the things that are within our control. And I think finding also some peace of mind, we're much more effective at making decisions and taking action and being happier if we are not distracted by worries. So, doing some of the mental well-being exercises and things recommended by experts and on our Career Hub, I think can also get you into a frame of mind where you can think of that future and move towards it. Now we're running a little bit short of time, but I just wondered if I could turn first of all to Francis and then a quick comment from each of the rest of you, maybe about 30 seconds each, to say anything else that hasn't been covered and that you'd just like to really focus in on, because I know we had a lot more to say and there's lots more questions, but we just have an hour. So over to you, Francis, for some quick words.
This is very exceptional situation, very extraordinary. I believe that this unprecedented because we never have experienced this kind of health situation. There's nothing compared with, for example, SARS that Hong Kong once experienced in year 2013. So this is a time that we need to be very cautious about, whether that's about the corporates, the treasury perspective, the financial health, or even for ourselves, our family, the relationship with others. I believe this is also a time that from the treasury perspective, we need to revisit if there are any strengths and weaknesses in operation, management, and also including financial philosophies, for example, and treasury policies. It is easy to say that people may quickly get a team to review the situation, etc., and what they can come up with, including additional liquidities from financial institutions if something like a contingent situation happens. But we have to bear in mind that if we are more well prepared, that's about the prudent investment, business, and financial philosophy. Perhaps we will be more prepared, and perhaps if we include the right ones, that will help the distinction between eminent corporates and good or average corporates, as well as treasurers. So very good to hear the peers share what they have observed and what they have believed that can make us stronger and perform better this evening. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Francis. And yeah, it's going to separate the good from the rest of the chaff from the wheat, isn't it, this situation? Joanna, last quick comment from you.
For me, would be to take 5 minutes and think about how you would like to reflect on this in years to come. Learn something, jot something down.
Excellent. Wilson.
Okay, so quick one, don't waste this crisis. It's a good time to reflect, reset, repurpose yourself and your teams, and believe that we will emerge from this stronger, wiser, and more connected. I use the word emerge because we just need to be conscious that there may be another variant of COVID coming in early next year. So just be prepared. Don't lose the learnings from this crisis and just think ahead at all times.
Thanks, Wilson. Adam.
I'll probably say appropriately challenge yourself in a healthy and safe way, appropriate challenge your stakeholders and those around you, and equally importantly, appropriately challenge your team to continue to deliver but learn more, and again, always to keep safe.
Thanks very much, Adam. So I support all of those views. And just to add for myself, if you're panicking, don't make the best decisions then. Keep calm, think positive, visualize a future that's where it's all going to work out somewhere or other. Let's keep a positive focus and enjoy the challenge, even though that may seem strange. So thanks to all my panelists. It's been great to have you here today. Wonderful insights, and I hope the audience has been able to take something away from that. And I hope we've answered many of the questions that you had today, but do contact us if you have other questions. So thank you once again. Do tune in later, because we talked about how important liquidity is. Well, we've got cash is king or queen later on today, so do tune into that. And thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.